Welcome to this CGTN special, The Power of Ideas, The Path to Peace. 80 years ago, humanity witnessed a defining triumph of justice, the hard-won victory in the World Anti-Fascist War. In that global struggle, China, as the main Eastern battlefield, played a decisive role in defeating Japanese fascism and supporting other fronts in Europe and Asia. These victories represented a collective stand for freedom, justice, and the courage to confront oppression. Today, as the world grapples with escalating geopolitical tensions, a deepening crisis of trust, and mounting threats to peace and development, we are compelled to ask, what lessons does history offer in our pursuit of lasting peace? And how can it guide us toward a more stable and just future? Please join me in welcoming our three distinguished speakers from today's discussion. They are Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Suzhou University and Vice President of Center for China and Globalization. And Christian Wagner, PhD student at Peking University from Germany. And Melinda Liu, daughter of Honorary Doolittle Reader Tong Sheng Liu. Well, 80 years after the end of the Second World War, why does this history still demand our remembrance? What must we never forget? Our speaker, Victor Gao, Vice President of CCG, will reflect on this pivotal chapter of history and highlight China's role as the main Eastern battlefield in the fight against Japanese aggression. It is a story written in blood and sacrifice, but also one of resilience and the unshakable resolve of the Chinese people. Let's warmly welcome Mr. Gao.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here to commemorate and to celebrate the victory of the war against Japanese fascism. Now, we know that the war in the Asian Pacific region against the Japanese fascism was a very important part of the victory against global fascism, mainly German Nazism in Europe, as well as Japanese fascism here in the Asian Pacific region. Now, for the Americans and for most of the people in the world, in the West in particular, they think about the war against Japanese fascism as a war of less than 4 years after the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. But for the Chinese nation, the war of resistance against Japanese aggression was a war of 14 years, starting from 1931 all the way to the victory in August 1945. For 10 years, China stood by itself, fighting more or less alone against the onslaught of the Japanese aggressors. In 1931, the Japanese aggressors occupied China's northeast, and then they gradually expanded their aggression into many parts of China. At the height of the Japanese occupation of China, they occupied up to about half of the landmass of China, and they managed to close off almost all the coastline of China. Altogether, China sacrificed the greatest amount. More than 30 million of my countrymen lost their lives, either killed in battle, or they became civilian casualties of the war. And one thing I hope mankind will always remember is that the Chinese nation refused to surrender. We promised that the nation as a whole should be united and keep on fighting against the aggressors from Japan. The miracle came when the United States also declared war on Japan after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Ever since the American joining this war of fighting against Japanese aggressors. This development is of contemporary importance too when we look back. That is, China and the United States became allies. We really stood shoulder to shoulder. We joined in all the military actions together. And together with other allies, we defeated Japanese fascism. I think China really made the greatest contribution, not only in terms of the more than 30 million casualties that we suffered as a nation, not only for 14 years in a row, we never hesitated, and the Chinese nation as a whole wanted to be united, regardless of our party affiliations, regardless of our social status. All of us as a nation should be united together in this fight against Japanese aggressors. People may say, yes, the United States probably also played a very important role. Yes, I don't disagree. But with or without the United States joining the war in 1941, the Chinese nation will continue to fight against the Japanese aggressors until we expel all of them out of China, until we achieve the real independence of China by expelling the Japanese aggressors. Now, what are the lessons when we look back 80 years later, 80 years after the unconditional surrender of Japan? I think there are several things. One is that I believe we still live in the international order which was established in 1945 upon the ashes of the Second World War, based upon the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany in Europe and the Japanese fascism in the Asian Pacific region. The order established in 1945 was not a unipolar world. It was meant to be a multipolar world to start with. And China was the first nation to sign the United Nations Charter, and China from the very beginning became a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So the first lesson we need to learn and keep in mind is that all the countries in the world, about 200 of us, need to rally around the United Nations and move forward together as mankind, regardless of our differences, and really focus on what matters the most. What matters the most for the people of today? Several things. One is to embrace peace. Secondly, to fight against wars of all kinds. Mankind does not need war. After the First World War, after the Second World War, we know the scourge, the calamities of war of all kinds for mankind. So, maintaining peace and unite against war of all kinds and focus on development. I would say people of all countries, mankind as a whole, need to improve their living standards. We need to really be friends with each other rather than view each other in hostile terms, try to destroy each other, for example, try to second guess each other and try to get to each other's jugular. That's not going to build a better world for tomorrow. That will be really the calamity for mankind's future. Now, the second thing, if I zoom in onto this part of the world, I would urge the Japanese nation and the Japanese government to really treasure the pacifist constitution of Japan. Japan, after its unconditional surrender in 1945, has lost any justification to rearm and to become militaristic again in this part of the world, either against China or against other countries in our region. Japan should really focus on peace and development and friendly relations with the rest of the world. Allow me to emphasize one thing. It is against the Japanese constitution if the Japanese government wants to move their military forces outside of Japan to other part of the world or any part of the world to constitute another military threat against other countries. This is very important. I think if we can permanently get rid of this Japanese fascism, whatever that remains of it, in whatever shapes and forms, I think East Asia as a whole and Asia-Pacific region as a whole will be a free region. All of us will benefit, including the Japanese people. That's the other thing. Now, the most important thing, allow me to emphasize, is peace between China and the United States. I've come up with my own theory. It's called inevitability of peace between China and the United States, which is a kind of rebuke of the so-called destined for war scenario for China and the United States. Why? Because when we look back upon the Second World War, when we look around the world of today, one thing is for sure. War is not an option and should never be an option for China and the United States. A war between China and the United States will be a global calamity. It will be, more or less, the Armageddon for mankind. So we need to promote peace between China and the United States, and we need to really urge those decision makers in Washington, don't view China as an enemy. China is not America's enemy. We were allies before in the Second World War in our joint efforts, which resulted in the unconditional surrender of the Japanese fascism. We can work together as partners going forward, and I hope all of us will believe in the inevitability of peace. Peace is the most important thing for China and for the United States, and peace is the only thing that really matters for mankind. Therefore, when we are gathered here, we are not only looking back, we are looking at the world today, but more importantly, we are looking forward into the future, a future of the world for our posterity, for our children, for our grandchildren. Then looking forward, how far do you want to look forward? In Chinese terms, we look forward minimum for the coming 5,000 years. I hope when we look forward into the coming 5,000 years, there'll be no war, there'll be no global war. And I see mankind in the coming 5,000 years in perpetual and eternal peace with each other. We are all brothers and sisters. No one should divide us. No one should plunge us in war, as mankind suffered in the Second World War. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gao. In 1970, a single act in Warsaw redefined the meaning of reconciliation. Then German Chancellor Willy Brandt's silent kneel before the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial. It was a gesture that transcended politics, an expression of a collective human conscience, and a solemn vow, never again. For our next speaker, Christian Wagner, a PhD student at Peking University from Germany. Remembering history is not mere ritual. It is a vital shield against the resurgence of fascism. Join me in welcoming Christian Wagner.
Hello, and welcome to the Power of Ideas. My name is Christian Wagner, and it is truly an honor to speak to you here today in this historic year marking 80 years since the end of Second World War. I stand before you not only as a German and an academic, but above all, as a fellow human being. So, why history matters so much? I know that for many of us in this auditorium, especially young people, World War II might feel far away, but try to imagine cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, millions of lives lost. World War II claimed the lives of an estimated 70 to 85 million people worldwide, with more than 40 million deaths in Europe alone. In Asia, the estimated death toll ranged between 20 to 30 million. These aren't just numbers. They represent unimaginable suffering, entire generations lost, cultures shattered, and a deep scar left on humanity. So why should we care if we didn't live through it? Because when we forget, we open the door for it to happen again. That's why remembering isn't just about the past, it's about protecting our future. The greatest tragedies of the Second World War continue to shape us all to this day. In Germany, our strong culture of remembrance has always shaped our perception. Mr. Willy Brandt, our former federal chancellor, embodied this with his kneel down in 1970 at the Warsaw Memorial. Peace is not everything, but without peace, everything is nothing. That has influenced the perceptions of generations of us Germans that we feel a special responsibility to secure peace and ensure that fascism does not rise again. But this responsibility is not Germany's alone. The legacy of fascism not only scared Europe, it left deep wounds across the world. China, the Korean Peninsula, indeed all of Asia, unfortunately, had to experience this terrible moment in history. And in the fight against the Japanese aggression, suffered great losses. For example, in the so-called Manchukuo, on the Korean Peninsula, millions of people were subjected to forced labor, exploitation, suffering, torture, and even death. This is all more astonishing that Japanese military figures like Nobusuke Kishi, arrested by the Allied forces as a Class A war crime suspect, became Japan's prime minister in 1957. The extent to, let's say, Japanese denazification remains questionable. This raises a deeper question. Has the world truly learned the lessons of history 80 years after the end of World War II? When you look around, history seems to repeat itself in many parts of the world. Conflicts and wars, suffering and misery, massive refugee flows, and above all, the root cause of wars, in my opinion, have still not been addressed. We still do not understand each other. There's a lack of mutual understanding and empathy when it comes to the lessons of Second World War, even though today we live in an interconnected world. How can this happen? Economic interests are one thing, but getting to know each other takes much more. It's also about ideology, information, and specifically our perception. So how we can respect and understand each other in this situation? We have all different perceptions. To discuss what is true and which perspective is valid, we must distinguish between objective truth and subjective truth. Objectively, wars and loss of human lives are the worst tragedies imaginable for all sides. But subjectively, those who endure this pain, like the people of China during the Second World War, carry deep emotional scars that we, separated by time or place, often cannot easily comprehend. Yet, we must strive to understand these feelings and learn from history. Similar with religion, culture, aesthetics, or art, we all have different perceptions and emotions that separate our understanding. Because our perceptions shape how we see the world, it is crucial to approach others, experiences, the cultures with respect and openness, rather than imposing one's views. And I often hear from my African friends, they welcome the world, visitors, partners, investments, even assistance. But they want the world to come with understanding and respect for their cultures, their traditions, and the realities of their countries. What they oppose is when outsiders arrive with a sense of superiority, assuming their way is always the better, expecting others to follow without question. This mindset is not just patronizing, it also can be dangerous. History has taught us what happens when people start believing that their truth, their system, their way of life is the one and only one that matters. The belief that one ideology or one civilization is better than all the rest, that's exactly where fascism begins. From the vantage point of 21st century, we know from our heart that this fascism must not be repeated. To do that, we must learn from history and respect different civilizations. So, how to solve it? With reason over prejudice. The German philosopher Kant once said, "Peace is the masterpiece of reason." If we understand each other, we realize that the differences are not so great, and together with our reason, we can solve all the problems in the world. So what does it mean to truly understand a country? Take China's example. Not with prejudice, but with reason. The most absurd thing you hear about China, Well, that's not real socialism. That's based on prejudice and feeling, because we think our perception is the only correct one. If we now shed light on these points, what do we see? So let me give you two examples. First, China has taken a completely unique path of its development, something unprecedented in the whole human history, and difficult to comprehend when drawing comparison with other countries. Whether it is from then until today, the Mao Zedong thought, the Deng Xiaoping theory, or Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. China's system has constantly evolved. What makes its path particularly remarkable is the two integrations. To integrate the basic tenets of Marxism with Chinese specific realities and with its traditional culture. Every domestic and international development requires an adjustment to the entire system, and China has just done this with socialism constantly evolving. Second, under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, nearly 800 million people have been lifted out of poverty. How is such a huge project possible? In theory, CPC guidelines specify that local governments, enterprises, people from all walks of life should work together to achieve this goal under the leadership of the party. But in practice, I had the opportunity to witness these efforts firsthand during a rural field visit in China. There I saw what poverty alleviation truly means. Farmers got new jobs, social security, housing, and local infrastructure. Socialism in China is a unique evolving system that adapts to meet the needs of its people, and recognizing this, respecting this, and even supporting this helps us to see beyond stereotypes and understands China's real progress. So when we reconnect this, the youth with this reality, why do some people fail to see still this reality? And today's media-driven world perception is shaped less by facts and more based on perspectives, especially among young people immersed in digital realities. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, advanced technologies are excellent for improving all our lives. But they carry the danger that we become so immersed in these virtual worlds that we no longer care about what is happening around us. Social media is not reality, and increasingly it distorts our perception. We feel informed, but we just see a fragment. We mistake our emotions for truth, illusion for fact, and when perception is distorted, misunderstanding and conflict follow. That's why young people in the world must reconnect with the real world and learn from real history to prevent fascism from rising again. I believe that young people, wherever they are, have no interest in taking any step toward chaos. Rather, we are also interconnected today that we are, in the essence, all neighbors. It is so important to maintain this and to learn about our perception so that we can challenge misinformation, avoid conflict born out of misunderstanding, and build a more peaceful and connected world. President Xi Jinping has pointed this out. He said, as the future of all countries is closely connected, tolerance, coexistence, exchange, and mutual learning among different civilizations play an irreplaceable role in advancing humanity's modernization process and making the garden of world civilization flourish. So let us begin now. Hate can only create more hate. But when we understand each other, when we respect each other, and when we take history seriously and learn from its lessons, we can create peace and help humanity flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Christian Wagner. As we reflect on the history of World War II, the painful lessons written in blood and tears remind us of the need to safeguard the hard-won peace we enjoy today. Yet even amid the unspeakable horrors of that war, there were moments when the light of humanity pierced through the darkest of times. Across countries and cultures, countless individuals risked their lives to save others. Acts of courage that stood in defiance of hatred and violence. Our next speaker, Melinda Liu, brings us one such story, a powerful reminder that even in war's darkest hour, the light of human compassion endured. Let's welcome Ms. Liu.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melinda Liu. I'm here to tell you a story. This is a story about war and peace. This is a story about strangers from different cultures, speaking no common language, who were allies, helping each other survive. This is a story about the common humanity that bound them together, offering precious lessons for the future. In April 1942, China had been engaged in war against Japan for years, but America had entered the war officially only after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. In retaliation, 80 American aviators trained in secret for a daring mission to try to stop Japan's series of stunning victories, in fact, in the Pacific. These Americans were called the Doolittle Raiders, after their leader, Jimmy Doolittle, who was a legendary American aviator. Together, their mission was to attack Japan's home islands, something that had never happened for centuries. The Americans had an audacious plan, daring plan, to use heavy bomber aircraft built to take off from land, but then to train their pilots to launch from an aircraft carrier in the open sea. This airplane, called the B-25, had never been used this way before. 16 of them, B-25s, undertook this very risky mission, made riskier even at the last minute because they had to take off earlier than expected. The raiders bombed their targets in Japan. This was a success. Everything went to plan. It was a morale-boosting action, which helped eventually turn the tide of the war in the Pacific. And as the pilots were running out of fuel in their aircraft over the Pacific, a miraculous tailwind actually blew them overland. Instead, they largely were over China. As a result, the Americans had to bail out using parachutes over China, landing in 4 provinces, mostly Zhejiang and Jiangxi province, in areas occupied by the Japanese. You can imagine, most of these aviators found themselves alone, hungry, lost, and being hunted by Japanese troops. They were discovered by Chinese strangers, grassroots farmers, fishermen, guerrillas, military, even bandits. Most of these residents had never even seen a foreigner before. They had no idea who these people were. One by one, however, the aviators were sheltered and fed and helped to escape from the Japanese. Of 80 raiders, 8 were captured by the Japanese troops, but 64, which is a surprisingly large number given what their circumstances were, made it safely to the areas of China that were occupied by the Chinese, thanks to the kindness of these Chinese strangers. By sheer serendipity, total coincidence, my late father, Tongxing Liu, was one of those strangers. And that's why I'm telling you his story today. He was a graduate of Tsinghua University, majoring in aeronautical engineering. He had been teaching in Kunming, where, as many of you know, Tsinghua had relocated to try to get away from the Japanese troops. It was reestablished at part of a university in Kunming called Xinan Lianda. My father, in April 1942, was waiting in a small town near Ningbo to be sneaked over the Japanese line to get to Western China. One evening, one of the locals came to his door, knocked on the door, and asked what should have seemed like a strange question. "Do you speak English?" And my father answered truthfully. He said, "Yes, I speak a little. Some of my university course material was in English." So they said, "Come with us and bring your suitcase." He didn't know what to expect. He was taken to a room, and inside were 5 white men in muddy uniforms, unshaven, hungry, and very suspicious, and of course, a little scared. They were the number 2 crew of the Doolittle Raiders. They had just bombed Tokyo, and they actually managed to crash land in a rice paddy not too far away. The problem was nobody could communicate with them, and they couldn't communicate with anybody. Everyone was nervous in the room because of this lack of communication. Immediately, my father determined that he would help as much as he could do. He became their translator, he became their guide, he traveled with them to get away from these dangerous areas. And from that point on, the Chinese, now being able to communicate, gave them incredible hospitality given the risks that were involved. Food, transport, protection, even had big gatherings in some towns away from the pursuing Japanese troops. My father traveled with crew number 2 to what is today called the city of Chuzhou in Zhejiang province. Other raiders were also gathering there, and they prepared for onward travel to Chongqing. He told me often that he spent time hiding in a large air raid shelter there, sometimes for almost the whole day, to protect themselves from Japanese bombing. His encounter was not unique, I have to say. Astonishing examples of sacrifice and survival involving Chinese and Westerners took place during the war, even before Pearl Harbor. The legendary Flying Tigers, whose name I think is familiar to most of you, began their daring exploits in the skies above China. They were mostly Americans, led by Claire Chennault, who fought under the Chinese military. The Flying Tigers shot down an extraordinary number of enemy aircraft, given their small numbers, and helped keep open the vital transport links through which supplies from British-held airports in India were brought to Western China, helping cities like Chongqing, Kunming, Chengdu, helping them stay alive. Last year, many audiences were moved to tears by watching a documentary titled The Sinking of the Lisbon Maru. In October 1942, Chinese fishermen in 46 small boats rescued 384 British prisoners of war aboard a sinking cargo ship which had been requisitioned by the Japanese to transport them. Recently, a memorial to these rescues was unveiled in Zhejiang province. So it was by sheer chance that some of the stories of these rescues that took place during World War II included my father's name. After his life-changing encounter with the Doolittle Raiders in 1942, my father and mother fulfilled their dream, which had been postponed by the war, to pursue further education in the U.S. So they were both in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And one day my father opened up the newspaper and saw a small news item saying, a group of men called the Doolittle Raiders are having a reunion in Minneapolis. So he said, hey, great, I'll go there and see my friends. And he reunited with his wartime friends, some of whom he had not seen since 1942. So the Raiders named him an honorary Doolittle member. He's the only ethnic Chinese to have this honor. And afterwards, he attended nearly every annual reunion that they had. So for these past 15 years, since my father passed away, I've helped dozens of descendants of Doolittle Raiders visit China to follow in their ancestors' footsteps. When the president of a group called the Children of the Doolittle Raiders, Jeff Thatcher, and I visited Chuzhou in 2017, we suggested to local authorities that a Doolittle Raid Memorial Hall might be established in their city, and eventually they agreed. And to our surprise, very quickly in 2018, we returned with 24 Raider descendants to inaugurate this memorial hall to the Doolittle Raid in Chuzhou. I had hand-carried many artifacts from the United States to Chuzhou so that this memorial hall could include original American as well as many valuable Chinese artifacts. That same year, 2 grandsons of a Doolittle Raider visited Chuzhou to visit the site where their grandfather had landed by parachute and to raise a toast of brandy to their ancestor. So moving further into the future then, in 2023, during a visit to San Francisco, Chinese President Xi Jinping actually talked publicly about Raiders' descendants visiting Chuzhou and the memorial hall to the Doolittle Raid there. He said after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. sent 16 B-25 bombers on an air raid to Japan in 1942. Running low on fuel after completing their mission, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle and his fellow pilots parachuted in China. They were rescued by Chinese troops and local civilians, but some 250,000 civilian Chinese were killed by Japanese aggressors in retaliation in the areas where the raiders landed. So it wasn't a small thing that these people had helped the strangers who fell from the sky. Many of them risked their lives and many of them lost their lives. President Xi said the hope of the China-US relationship lies in the people. The foundation is in our societies. Its future depends on youth, and its vitality comes from exchanges at the subnational level. History reflects what Americans and Chinese hold in common, a shared humanity. Grassroots exchanges, especially among the younger generation, your generations, are crucial for keeping this lesson alive. I believe outreach to younger generations helps them carry the legacies of World War II into the future. Above all, the most important World War II lesson is that even under the shadow of death, the shared spirit of humanity manifest in acts of courage and mutual aid bound Americans and Chinese together. It's a powerful force that transcends borders and endures through history, a force that we need more than ever today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. Thank you to our three distinguished guests for their insightful contributions. Now, let's take a short break. We'll return to our panel discussion in a minute. Welcome back. Now you're watching CGTN special, The Power of Ideas, The Path to Peace. I start with Victor, 80 years later. What's the importance? Why should we remember World War II? And in particular, of course, for people in this part of the world, the Chinese role in defeating the Japanese aggression or in defeating, basically winning the Second World War?
Well, I think ever since 1945, the greatest challenge for mankind is to prevent another world war from happening. I think more or less mankind has succeeded in achieving that goal. However, over the decades, over the years, we still witness lots of wars, regional wars, small wars, internal civil wars of all kinds, plaguing mankind. Therefore, I think it is time for mankind to really wake up to the new challenges. We not only want to prevent a global war, a global scourge for mankind as a whole, we should also have the wisdom and the courage and the vision to mobilize all resources to prevent wars of all kinds. Now, this is easier said than done. But if we look around the world, in different parts of the world, we still see lots of such wars and conflicts taking toll of thousands, if not tens of thousands, or even millions of human lives. I think we need to focus on really what matters. That is, to treat everyone, every part of the world, every country in the world as equal. No one should be allowed to dominate above all the others. And no country should be allowed to indulge in the fantasy that they have the truth, the total truth, or nothing but the truth. Truth, relatively speaking, is relative. Your version of the truth may be different than my version of the truth, and the difference should be our strength rather than should tear us into pieces.
Thank you, Victor. To Melinda, you talked a very touching story there about your father and his comrades rescuing the American pilots at that time. I wonder, what's your first reaction when you heard of the story from your father?
Actually, it's a good question because it's one of the paradoxes of my involvement with this story and my father's involvement with the story. I was actually a very, very young child when I became aware of these facts of my father's experience. And probably because I was so young, I had no idea how unusual it was. You know, he talked about it occasionally, but not very much. And here's the thing about the wartime generation. So many of them went through these astonishing stories of survival, bravery, courage, tragedy. But most of them will say, I'm not a real hero. I was just doing what I was supposed to do, or I was helping my comrades. The people who were heroes, they didn't really want to be called heroes. They were very modest, generally. And I think it's not just World War II. It probably happened in many conflicts. I think World War I was the same. And for the younger generations, we didn't think these heroes had anything to do with our lives, even when they were our parents or our grandparents. Somehow it was just something that those old folks did. But now, as I myself as one of those old folks, I realize younger generations really do need to take on board these experiences that the older generations experience.
What do you want?
Yeah. Melinda, let me tell you, your late father was a hero to me and to all of us.
Thank you.
And you, by promoting peace and friendship between China and the United States, you are also a hero.
Oh, now
So
it's
I
my
think,
turn to say I'm not a hero.
I think it is really a responsibility for all of us to learn from Melinda, learn from his late father, learn from all the Doolittle readers to promote peace, especially peace between China and the United States.
Speak of that, Melinda, you know, I know you touched upon that a little bit. But how can we keep this spirit alive, the friendship between, say, the Chinese young people, American young people in particular?
To me, it's pretty simple. Maybe I'm overly simplistic, but I think both in our own countries and also internationally, I think it's really important to focus on what unites us, the fact that we're all human beings, instead of all the things that divide us, because there are many differences. Languages are different, cultures are different, history is different, geography is different. But if we can focus on the shared humanity that we all have, I think that would be my recipe for the future. Thank you.
Let's move on to Mr. Wagner. You know, those who can't remember history are condemned to repeat it. And that's importance of remembering history. And but to today's youth, the younger generation, how can we inspire them to learn history, to learn the lessons of history?
I think there are several points to point out here. First of all, we always think we need to learn from the theories, from the history, we read the old books, and then we understand it or we feel connected. But in practice, it's not that easy, because we know all when we go to universities, to the schools, and then we learn in the class and maybe fall asleep or something like this. But what touch us are our emotions, especially when we are young. We are so full of emotions. Everything makes us so sensitive. When we hear the histories, when we watch the movies, when we hear the stories like today, your story, your personal family story, like also my grandparents, when I remember their stories, like from the personal people we know, we're emotionally attached to them. Also our country and the people around us in our neighborhood, mostly the biggest heroes are just a room next to us. So making the people-to-people communication also with people from other countries. Like, for example, when I was studying myself at the Renmin University for my master's degree, I was always with the African community in touch. And their stories inspired me and influenced me dramatically. So, and this kind of influences from other people also builds our future in a way, because it gives us our position to build our own future. Maybe that's the reason why I'm today even here, because this kind of people inspire me, and their stories inspire me. Also, your story is inspiring me. Yeah. So, I think to find a reason where we can use our own emotions for the communities and learn from the history to build our own future as well.
What do you think we need to do to prevent any future conflicts or war in a global scale? I will start with Mr. Wagner.
I think something which inspires me about the future of the world, learned from China actually, is the poverty elimination of 800 million people, which is actually something we can learn worldwide. all the wars, what are the reasons of wars? Mostly it's something economic reason, maybe ideological or religious in certain extent, but mostly economic interest. So, but do we really need these days always high luxury or something like this? Because we see that poverty in the world, or like the problems of economic problems of ordinary people, can be solved already. We can make, for example, in the whole Africa already the poverty alleviation with similar strategies like in China, and this is all over the world like this. We have the most advanced technologies in human history nowadays, also AI and all kind of different things in the agricultural industry, for example. If we can use it, work together, make the technology exchanges, more cooperation, and focus on really, if there are some issues, we can solve them based on win-win, based on try to build something together. For example, if we see this conflicts in the Middle East, instead of fighting each other, maybe there could be already problems solved together by building together, by creating a shared future together. But this kind of thinking about we can share or we can build together is always kind of falling out of the table, and this is quite sad. And instead, more the emotions are winning, and the personal interest, the egoistic interest, but not the common interest of the people. And I think if you just focus what the people need, what not I need, what the people need, the collective, the region itself, then we find always the answer for peace. Because what everyone wants, then it's not war. And I think the most important thing is just stop fighting and always focus the diplomacy. I'm like disappointed to see in which extent in the modern world these days weapons speak more than words, and I think diplomacy is the highest good which we created since the Second World War with the United Nations Charter and all the agreements back then. And these agreements should create peace for the whole future of humanity and humankind. So I think if we just follow this United Nations charters, the international law, and not ignoring it, then we can maybe find more peaceful approaches.
May I use this opportunity to make a personal recommendation? And I was very touched by Melinda's real story about her late father, about her family, about the two little raiders, etc. And I understand the two little raiders network in the United States. Now all the two little raiders already passed away, but their descendants are still keeping the tradition alive. My recommendation is very simple. I think, the Chinese president mentioned that thousands of the Chinese people perished, were killed by the Japanese aggressors because they were involved in saving the two little raiders, or they were suspected by helping the two little raiders. And many Chinese people were also involved, just like Melinda, like your late father did. I want to see whether we can really do some work to make sure that the descendants of the Chinese people who really helped the two little raiders, just like your late father, for example, who was one of the very outstanding person involved, as well as those Chinese people killed by the Japanese aggressors in association with the two little raiders, can be kind of identified, and we can also create a kind of body to honor their parents or their grandparents did. Because I truly believe between China and the United States, like Melinda said, like the Chinese President Xi Jinping said, people-to-people exchanges are the most important thing. In my case, I spent 4 years at Yale University. I benefited hugely from that part of my life. And I don't think the Chinese people and the American people are destined to be enemies. We can be friends, we can be partners. And the Doolittle story, and I want to add one thing. I think Doolittle and the Doolittle raiders did do much to end the Japanese fascism. So this legacy should be promoted for as long as possible. More and more people in China and in the United States should have the benefit of this story. And while on the American side, they've done excellent job in getting the two little raiders, the descendants, organized in China, it's time for us to get our acts together we also do our honor of anyone in China back in 1942 who helped the Doolittle Raiders, many of whom sacrificed their lives. So, if any one of you agree with me, we can do something together.
Let's hope that it will come true soon.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all
Thank
of you. Now it's time for our question and answer session. We are joined today, as you can see, by a group of bright college students. Let's hear what's on the minds of the younger generation. If you have a question, for any of our guests, please raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you for insightful sharing. And I was actually very moved by Melinda Liu's story. And as a student from the School of Journalism, I think I should also learn more from you as an experienced journalist. So my question for you is that with the current US-China tensions, I'm wondering, what do you think is the best way for our two countries to work together for global peace? Thank you.
That's a very good question, and I think a lot of
$1 million question.
yeah, senior people are trying to ask themselves that very same question. But thank you very much for your kind words about my father's story. I think first, concentrate on the common areas that have some possibility of cooperation. And we've seen these. These are nothing new. We've seen them in the past. Environment and climate change, narcotics control. And I think there have been kind of innovative parts of diplomacy that we don't normally think of as normal foreign policy. Like, apparently for more than 40 years, the national parks administrations of China and America have been having exchanges and people visiting and lots of study groups. And of course, maybe some of you may be aware that China is now launching its national park administration. And you'll see that they've learned quite a lot from what America had to offer. Now, these are soft topics, what I would call soft topics. These are not the hard topics, like, nuclear non-proliferation. But I think it's a deep tragedy when those areas where cooperation is possible also suffer when other areas, more prickly areas like trade, become the kind of focus of a bilateral relationship. I think that there is a lot that can be done between the two countries, and when you have this sort of multi-sectoral type of exchange and dialogue and working together going on, it builds confidence to be able to tackle some of the more difficult ones as well.
Any more questions? Do we see that? Yes.
War history seems like ancient history to many young people. So my question is, how can we make it matter to them?
It's a question for you, Christian.
So I think these days, what's happening in our modern era with the whole new media is more this kind of lifestyle consumption societies in the whole world. Like, young people just focus on what is the trend, what is now maybe funny or like just entertaining, but they're not really focusing in this lifestyle new media era on the real historical parts. And I think it doesn't need to be excluded or something, it can be integrated. So instead of focusing maybe on more like trendy things, maybe the trendy things could also be historical. So let's think about let's say the one Wukong game, I think it was very famous, this kind of ancient computer game about Wukong. And it was around the world, and the people could learn about the ancient China from it as a lifestyle game. And it could affect also other areas. It could be about the fashion. It could be about, let's say, in Beijing, you see in the hutongs, for example, how the people wear the ancient clothes. It's also a part of connecting to the history. And I think this could be more extended in the field of also the young history. Let's say since the foundation of the People's Republic until today, what so many things happened, and also this is a part now of Chinese history basically, and it could be also a part of this kind of lifestyle trends that to focus on the young history of China and all over the world.
It's good advice. Any more questions? Let me see. Yeah, please.
I have a question for Professor Gao. Nowadays, we know our President Xi is calling for every country to work together for the fate of mankind. So do you think we still have chance to achieve that, or we can achieve that goal under the international order created in 1945, instead of create a new world order?
First of all, let's think about what is the international or world order established in 1945. Now, the order established in 1945 after defeating Nazi Germany in Europe and Japanese fascism here in Asia is a multipolar world, is a world which will never allow the occurrence of another world war. This is very important. Now, many people blame the United Nations for being very ineffective, which I agree. But the United Nations has achieved one goal. That is, there has never been another world war since 1945. In that sense, we should be grateful to the international world order established in 1945. Now, President Xi Jinping has talked about the shared interest, the common destiny for mankind. But my personal interpretation is that that is still within the existing world order. I don't think China wants to build a new world order. I think it is up to all of you, the younger generation, to stand up and to see, yes, there is always a better way. There is a highway. There is a low way. And we want to go the highway. The highway is always promoting peace, defending free trade, and make sure that the world we live in is a multipolar world. It will never be allowed to become a unipolar world dominated by one single country.
With that, we wrap up this CGT special, The Power of Ideas, The Path to Peace. Thanks again to our distinguished guests, Victor Gao, Melinda Liu, and Christian Wagner. I'm your host, Xu Qinduo. Thank you so much for being with us. Bye for now. Let's do it again.